America and other free and open societies face crucial challenges and opportunities abroad that affect security and prosperity at home. This is a series of conversations with guests who bring deep understanding of today's battlegrounds and creative ideas about how to compete, overcome challenges, capitalize on opportunities, and secure a better future. I am H.R. McMaster. This is Battlegrounds.
On today's episode of Battlegrounds, our focus is on India, a strategic partner of the United States. Our guest is Subrahmanyam Jaishankar, who has served as the Minister of External Affairs since May of 2019. Previously, Minister Jaishankar served as India's Foreign Secretary. During his diplomatic career of almost 40 years, he was India's ambassador to numerous states, including the US and China. Minister Jaishankar is a member of India's Upper House of Parliament, the Rajya Sabha, where he represents the state of Gujarat. He received the Padma Shri Award in 2019 and holds a PhD in International Relations from Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi. He recently published a book entitled The India Way: Strategies for an Uncertain World. India is the geographic anchor of the Indian subcontinent, which borders the Indian Ocean in the south and the Himalayan mountains in the north. From antiquity to modern era, scores of indigenous rulers and empires governed large swaths of Indian territory, developed rich cultures, and cemented India as a center for global maritime trade. The British Empire consolidated political power over India in the 19th century through arrangements with local rulers. In 1947, after years of peaceful struggle led by Mahatma Gandhi, Britain departed India, partitioning it along religious lines into the independent states of India and Pakistan. The bloody partition precipitated the fraught and complex India-Pakistan relationship. The two countries fought 4 wars before the end of the 20th century. India and Pakistan clashed directly over the disputed region of Jammu and Kashmir in wars in 1947 and 1965. And in a border conflict in the heights of Kargil in 1999. Pakistan continues to host militant and terrorist groups that fight Indian security forces and conduct acts of terrorism in Indian-administered Kashmir, as well as other parts of India. The Pakistan-based Lashkar-e-Taiba carried out terrorist attacks in Mumbai in November 2008 that killed nearly 200 Indians over the course of 3 days. The United States established diplomatic relations with India in 1946 and recognized its independence in 1947. Despite India's proclamation of neutrality in the Cold War and leadership in the non-aligned movement, the United States and India collaborated on issues of higher education and food security through the 1950s and the 1960s. Yet the relationship suffered setbacks. During the 1971 war that established Bangladesh, formerly East Pakistan, as an independent state, the United States supported West Pakistan while India supported East Pakistan. As tensions rose between India and Pakistan, both countries pursued nuclear weapons outside of the International Non-Proliferation Treaty and declared themselves nuclear states in May of 1998. India's acquisition of nuclear weapons exacerbated the already strained U.S.-India relationship. But the relationship improved at the turn of the 21st century, in part due to economic advancement in India, growing distance from Cold War-era policies, mutual concerns about a rising China, and shared goals in the fight against international terrorism. President Bill Clinton visited India in 2000, and President Bush lifted all sanctions imposed on India for the 1998 nuclear tests in September of 2001. In 2005, President Bush announced that the U.S. would cooperate with India on civil nuclear cooperation, despite the fact that India had not signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, heralding a new era of trust and confidence in U.S.-India ties. Later that year, the United States and India signed a new defense framework and drafted the India-U.S. Civil Nuclear Deal legislation, codifying the establishment of civil nuclear cooperation between India and the U.S. In 2008, Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice signed the U.S.-India 123 Agreement for Civil Nuclear Cooperation, which laid out the specific parameters of the cooperation. Today, the U.S. and India share robust diplomatic and cultural ties. The United States is home to a thriving Indian-American diaspora of 4 million. India and the United States are strong trade, security, and defense partners. Ministers of State and Defense from both countries collaborate closely through the 2+2 ministerial dialogue, and they work together with regional partners Japan and Australia through the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, or Quad. In January 2021, India began a 2-year term as a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council. India, with a population of 1.3 billion, is the world's most populous democracy and a massive emerging market. It holds the world's 4th largest coal reserves and is bound to play a vital role in overcoming the interconnected challenges associated with health security, food security, water security, energy security, climate change, and disruptive technologies. We welcome Minister Jaishankar amid evolving security dynamics across the Indo-Pacific region, and as India and the world struggles to overcome and recover from the COVID-19 pandemic.
Minister Jaishankar, welcome to Battlegrounds. It is great to see you, and I should tell you that the opportunity to work with you and our friend Ajit Doval was really one of the highlights of my time in Washington. You're looking well, and thanks for joining us on Battlegrounds.
Well, thank you. You're looking well too, and it's good to be here. I'm speaking to you from New York. I'm here. I'm here for 2 days. In fact, probably first time after COVID started. On my way after this to Washington. So there's a lot of our relationship on my mind as I speak to you.
Well, I think if COVID-19 taught us anything, it's that challenges and problems that develop in one part of the world can only be dealt with in an exorbitant price once they reach our shores. And many of us here, all of us here, I think in America, have been watching the second wave, this devastating wave in India. Our hearts go out to our Indian friends, and I just wondered, as you're having your discussions here, what do you see as the lessons from this struggle that we're still in the midst of, and what should the world know about India's experience? What more can other countries do to help India and the world overcome and recover from COVID-19? I know this is a topic in one of your chapters in your excellent book, The India Way, and I wonder if you just share your thoughts on how do we recover from this trauma of the past year.
Well, HR, the way things are in India right now, we were hit by a very devastating second wave, and it's really the virulence of the strains of the virus this time were far more than the first wave, which is why you had a much higher case load as well as much greater fatalities, unfortunately. But look, at the end of the day, the big takeaway, which is your question, is when you have a global challenge, a global problem of this scale, the only way out is global cooperation, global mitigation in a way. So we've of course been dealing with this challenge. The hospitalization issues, the oxygen issues, the beds issues, and these are things which America knows well, because you went through it as well last year, including in the city where I am in New York. So when people look at the television screens and see what's happening in some foreign country, I think there needs to be that realization that this could easily happen to us. In many cases, it has happened to us. And the right response is therefore to help each other out. And I'm glad to say we've seen a tremendous outpouring of international support and solidarity at this time. But one is the public health, the humanitarian immediate medical response, if you would. But I think there are larger issues for the world order, for global politics in a way. Today, clearly, we all need to think very much more about health security. I would argue that our sense of national security has actually widened as a consequence of the pandemic. We today, whether it is medicines, whether it's vaccines, whether it's even, last year it was masks and PPEs. In some countries, I would say even food, because the supply chains, when they were diverted, has made people anxious. The second is, I hear this term strategic autonomy increasingly, this time from the West, in Europe, for example, which is, that for essential things, we need to be self-sufficient, or we need to de-risk our exposure, that we shouldn't be over-dependent on single geographies or one set of supply chains. So I think the post-pandemic conversations, in fact, even as the pandemic is going on, the conversations are beginning to change towards more resilience, more reliability. How do you de-risk the world? And to my mind, it really makes an argument for what I would call decentralized globalization, that you have different centers of production, you have the assurance that if something, God forbid, goes wrong somewhere, the world will not then be so completely threatened as the way we have seen really in the last year and a half. There are, of course, in addition, digital lessons, but that's a whole subject in itself.
I found your view on globalization and India's role in the world really fascinating in the book. And you wrote something like, as Indians prepare for greater contributions, you should rely on your own traditions to equip India for facing the tumultuous world. And throughout the book, you explained how India's past, especially the colonial experience, left an indelible imprint on how India's leaders view your nation's role in the world and influences your approach toward the global economy, towards geostrategic competition, alliances and partnerships, and just multilateralism broadly. And the one chapter, I think, on the Mahabharata was very, very interesting as well, where you use one of the two ancient Sanskrit epics of ancient India as a metaphor, really, for India's approach to the world. So I know it's tough to condense, into a short answer in an interview, but could you explain this theme to our audience? How does India's past shape India's leaders' view of India's role in the world?
Well, look, my central thesis is that India is a deeply pluralistic society. And has a very open, very positive view towards engaging the world, and that it must do so by really, in a sense, falling back on its traditions and history and culture, so that people intuitively understand the challenges of today. And the reason I picked the epic is, most Indians are very conversant with the epic. So it's like asking somebody in the Western world, if you give them analogies. I mean, you speak of the Trojan horse. Now, people know exactly, what or if you say a siren song. I mean, they know what you're talking about. To a large extent, I think there are changes. There are conversational changes in India, because there are changes going on in India, and it's important for people to understand that these changes can be a source of strength of better understanding of what is happening in the world. We are, as a deeply pluralistic society, we are intuitively a very international society. This term, the world as a family, is very deeply embedded in Indian thinking. And a lot of the challenges of today, the interplay of powers, their relationship, the interdependence, the constraints on power. For me, an important question: ethics. How much does ethics matter at all? And if so, what is the role of ethics? I mean, you would perhaps in today's world talk about branding and reputational and soft power. But at the end of the day, ethics is at the heart of that. So it's an attempt really to use these analogies to both make Indians understand the world, as well as the world understand that there are great traditions of statecraft and diplomacy. And I would say almost, you can say, multipolar politics in India, which is very, very appropriate for this day and age.
Right. Well, Minister, I know we had long conversations about this, about really our approach to a free and open Indo-Pacific. I remember, I think it was my first day or one of my first 2 days, maybe, as I unexpectedly arrived in Washington, that I had the opportunity to host you in my office. And we took out a map and we talked really about how important it was to promote a free and open Indo-Pacific as an alternative to a closed authoritarian model. And it was clear from that conversation that it was in U.S. interests that India have a more a stronger voice, an even stronger voice than it had in the past, because of our shared values, because of our shared principles. And I wonder if you might talk about your vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific, and then maybe also talk about this crisis that we feel in democratic nations these days, right? There are doubts, I think, across the free world about the effectiveness of democratic processes and institutions.
Well, let me start with the last observation. I don't know if there are doubts in other parts of the world. I want to tell you very bluntly, there are no doubts in India. I mean, we Indians are extremely confident about our democracy. We believe that that's really the political system and the value system that suits us best, because, as I said, it captures our fundamental diversity and the culture of really reasoning and coming to positions, and an acceptance of what the rules of the day throughout. So over the last 75 years, I think we've held multiple elections. We've had peaceful transitions of power. There are elections at different levels. One test of which is, of course, that if you have changes in the party in power at different levels, that itself is proof that democracy is working. And I don't think anybody in India would trade democracy for an alternative form of governance. So it has its challenges, it has its complexities, but I do want, because I read about this mostly in the, I would say, Western political science or sometimes intellectual discussions. There could be these, some doubts there, but I do want to make very clear that's not the case with us. Yeah. The larger issue of, how does free and open Indo-Pacific work out? Look, first of all, Indo-Pacific. I think the period, and I've dealt on this at some length in my book, the period when we treated the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean as two separate arenas, that's now behind us. The world's changed, the United States has changed, the number of players have changed, the seamlessness of these two oceans is evident, whether it's politics, whether it's economics, whether it's trade. So now the question is, if once you accept there is an Indo-Pacific and there are multiple interests at work in determining the character of Indo-Pacific, it is very obvious that Indo-Pacific is central really to the prospects of the world, to the welfare of the world. It's important that those countries who believe that it should remain open, that that decisions about the Indo-Pacific should be taken on the basis of rules or respect for international law, that we conduct each other in a way in which our collective interests are best served. I think that's the broad thinking. A lot of countries agree on this. Some of them, like India and the US and Japan and Australia, have gone to the extent of actually creating a platform where we discuss issues of shared interest and cooperate on that. I think we do a lot of good for the world. I mean, to me, a free and open Indo-Pacific is very much part of doing global good.
Yeah, and I think the Quad format, which it pre-existed the Trump administration, and we worked on, I think very effectively initially in the Trump administration, really throughout the administration. I think was galvanized in large measure, wasn't it, by the competition with China? Would you talk about really how you view the threat from really the Chinese Communist Party's policies? I think all of us have seen that the COVID-19 crisis, it seems to have catalyzed geostrategic competitions, and you saw it quite closely there as we saw People's Liberation Army soldiers attacking Indian soldiers on the line of actual control. But that's been matched by aggression, as we all know, in the South China Sea, and the threats toward Taiwan and in the Senkakus, and various forms of cyber threats, the economic aggression toward Australia. So how do you see the trajectory of the competition with China, and what more can the free world do really to confront this aggression and to promote a free and open Indo-Pacific rather than allow China to promote this authoritarian mercantilist model, and it seems as if they're endeavoring to create servile relationships in the region?
Mm-hmm. Well, look, I would obviously perhaps analyze that. I mean, there are different ways of looking at it. Okay, one is a kind of interstate analysis, if you would, and in the interstate analysis, if you have a sharp increase of power of one particular state, there are consequences in international relations. It's not new. So that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it, of course, is that different countries have different challenges. Sometimes in international relations, it's very common for countries to cooperate in wherever their interests converge. It would not be for the first time nor the last time. That's another way of looking at it. Obviously, all of us have values and beliefs. We discussed some of them before. And the basic thing about values and beliefs is they are values and beliefs precisely because you think that's the right way to go. So if you and I think that's the right way to go, it's natural that we would have a certain bonding in that regard. And when we look at the world, we would intuitively tend to find common ways of addressing a global challenge. I would quite honestly prefer to see, and I say this as someone who's been practicing diplomacy, still continue to do so at a political level. I think a lot of how we deal with the world, because at the end of the day, there is something called global good. There is a global commons. There is global politics. I am right now in the city where the United Nations has its headquarters. And the United Nations as the centerpiece of the world order, does represent a shared desire to promote global cooperation. So I think it's important for countries who think similarly on key issues of the day, who find that their interests converge, to find ways of working together. And I think that's really what's happened in the case of the Quad. I mean, today we are discussing, for example, vaccines or supply chains. During your time, we were discussing maritime security and connectivity. There are a lot of other issues which have come up in between, technology issues, critical resources issues. This is what world politics is about, which is nations trying to find, common ground and working relationships.
And we know, of course, these problems don't don't respect countries' borders and boundaries, and so it's important for us to work together on these cross-cutting issues. And I think, of course, in connection with the Chinese Communist Party's aggression, we have to really defend against it and deter further aggression. But also, we have to strengthen ourselves, right? We have to we have to make sure that we are as strong as we can be. I think socially, politically, economically. And you mentioned the Quad format and the importance of working just broadly with like-minded countries. What would be top on your agenda? What more can we do together to build a better future and to strengthen ourselves so we can ensure our competitive advantages remain our competitive advantages into the future?
Look, again, I don't want to make this about country A or country B, however big the countries may be. To my mind, this is the big issue, okay? The world's not going to be the same after the COVID, whenever that after is. It's not going to be the same because we are, as I said, all of us in different ways are going to worry about our international exposure. Historically, when times are good, you tend to see international relations as endless opportunities, sort of waiting to be exploited. When times are tough, you realize that those opportunities come mixed with a lot of risks which take place, and we're going through one of them, which is the pandemic. So, as I said, what's the big takeaway? The big takeaway is we need a better world, a safer world, a less risky world, something which, by the way, works for everybody, because that too is an issue. If we construct a world order in the name of globalization, but it works for some countries at the expense of others, it works for some people in some countries at the expense of others, we're going to have, frankly, dysfunctional international relations and dysfunctional societies. We've seen that in the last decade. So I would argue that in many ways, international equity and fairness, these are not just noble principles. They are a practical common sense. It's like creating a broader stakeholdership in the world so that the totality of the world is better balanced. And then you apply that in different ways. We are going through a pandemic today. The key question, the number one question on everybody's mind today is COVID. And the worry which people have, and I've heard this expressed by many countries, do we have accessible, affordable, vaccines? Now, we can't have a world which is part vaccinated and part neglected, because that world's not going to be safe. So how do we, get through the global challenges in a global way? I think that's the big question. And here, the importance of countries willing to harmonize their national interest with global good. If countries, especially large countries, pursue their national interest disregarding everything else, I think the world's going to have some big problems.
I think this competition that we found ourselves in doesn't have to foreclose on cooperation on the issues that you've mentioned, and in particular, I think we're facing these interconnected problems of climate and environment, which is tied to energy security, issues of energy security, and as you know, with just the vastness of India and the size of the population, it's also connected with food security and water security and health security. So, what is top on your agenda in connection with not just the Quad format, but just multilateral cooperation across our free and open societies? How can we work on these problems together? What's India's perspective on this interconnected problem set?
Well, there is one part of what we have been brought up, you and I, to think about as globalization. Okay, that's investment, trade, finance. That's what we were told was at the heart of globalization. I would argue that has not worked for the world as a whole. Okay, it's worked for some countries, as I said, and some people in some countries. I'm not against it. I'm just pointing out the limitations of the current model, if you would. But I want to draw your attention to my mind, the real issues of globalization and what is really global, what cannot be stopped at the borders. A pandemic cannot be stopped. Climate change is not limited to one country. Terrorism, if you had an experience. I mean, if you have terrorism in Afghanistan or Pakistan or Iraq, it's not going to stop there. It's going to spread beyond borders. So, to my mind, the real global challenges are these examples: pandemics, climate change, terrorism, and how do we find better solutions? Because if the problems are multinational or international, but we are conditioned to think national. You can see the challenge out there, and I do think, in a way, the devastation of the pandemic is going to compel us to look at this very urgently. I would hope we pay the same kind of attention to climate change, and we get serious about addressing it. And when I say serious about addressing it, to my mind, people keep talking about ambitions and commitments. I rarely hear the people who speak ambitions and commitments speak about resources. You are a military man. You don't draw up a plan and not have a understanding of what the resources are. The plan isn't worth anything. The third issue is really terrorism. I mean, you've studied it. I by the way, was refreshing my mind on your book, with your experience, especially in dealing with AFPAC, I mean, you see the challenge that we have. That if we overlook or excuse or justify terrorism, accept it as some kind of, shall I say, unorthodox statecraft, then I think we are setting ourselves up for a really huge challenge, and that's unfortunately been the history of the world for the last 40 years.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if I could ask you more about how you see the jihadist terrorist threat in South Asia. Of course, I think this is a disastrous policy, this complete withdrawal from Afghanistan. I believe that the very small numbers of troops that we had there were essentially an insurance policy against the Taliban, again, exerting control over large portions of Afghanistan and declaring the reestablishment of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. And what's astounding about it, Minister, to me, is how self-delusional we've been. I mean, we conjured up the enemy we would prefer in Afghanistan, a Taliban that would share power, that would be, more benevolent, I guess, or less brutal, and a Taliban that has a bold line between it and other jihadist terrorist groups, including Al-Qaeda. But you're very familiar with the terrorist ecosystem that exists in Pakistan in particular, and the danger that poses India, as India's been on the receiving end of many terrorist attacks since 1947, right? Terrorism has been an arm of the Pakistan state's foreign policy, essentially, since 1947. Mm-hmm. What do you see as the trajectory in connection with the strength and danger associated with these jihadist terrorist organizations? And what is India doing to protect itself from the threat from groups such as Lashkar-e-Taiba and others that are determined to commit mass murder as an element of their foreign policy and organizations that are sponsored by the Pakistani state?
Well, look, this is, at one level, it's such a common sense issue. at one level, because there is so much, I would say, I don't know, vested interest. I don't know what to call it. I mean, the ability to delude ourselves, as you said. Now, in many ways, people hoped that 9/11 would provide defining clarity. In fact, very frankly, I was immediately after 9/11 for some years dealing with our US policy at that time. And I think there was a willing, shall I say, willing acceptance of a narrative from Pakistan, which everybody knew was not justified by the ground reality, and in fact, to the extent that that country was even proclaimed as by one of your predecessors as a major non-NATO ally. So, what happens is we struggle. Okay, we struggle between the clarity of analysis. We know the truth. Okay, it's not like the world is collectively stupid. Somewhere, I think we temper our analysis and the clarity of our convictions with some kind of, I would say, habits of the past, a degree of risk aversion, looking for easy answers, and that leads you down a certain path. I mean, if things are what they are today in Afghanistan, I mean, it didn't happen overnight. It happened because in the last 20 years, a series of decisions and conclusions and policy judgments were made, and they all, took us in a certain direction. And once they take you in a direction, you say, well, I'm in it, so I'll have to, this constrains my options, and that's the way it is. And, I sort of, in a sense, bring you back to one of your other books dealing with Vietnam, I mean, which is every decision that you take locks you in, or at least constrains your next set of decisions. So we have, I think all of us struggle with it. We have what we have. Now, I mean, to me, as a practical person, the question is, what's the best that we can do in this given situation? I do believe that for all its limitations and mistakes, and there were many, the gains of the last 20 years in Afghanistan, both of us have been there. An entire generation has grown up in Afghanistan with a much better life than they had in the 20 years before that. I think that's something worth protecting, defending, nurturing. It's important that we understand that Afghanistan too is a pluralistic society with a diversity of ethnicities, viewpoints, faiths, that minorities are given their due, that women and children, their rights are protected, that we all that was built up by the entire world, the United States most of all. I do think that they are of great value, and that they should not be lightly sacrificed at the expediency of politics of the day.
I'm so glad you mentioned the gains in Afghanistan. It really is a transformed society based on what it was certainly under Taliban rule from 96 to 2001. And what was so lamentable, I think, about this deal, the deal made under the Trump administration and then affirmed by the Biden administration, is that it disadvantaged the Afghan government on the way out, right? With forcing them to release 5,000 of some of the most heinous people on earth, not demanding a ceasefire, and then the constant statements Ashraf Ghani, President Ghani, for him to do more for peace. Well, how about saying something to Hibatullah Akhundzada, right, and the Taliban? So what I'd like to ask you, Minister, is what more can the international community do? Can India and others do to support the Afghan government and to deny the Taliban, the effort of turning the clock back to 1996, and I fear a return of the civil war from 92 to 96. It could be devastating for the people of Afghanistan, but also for the region associated with a refugee crisis if that large scale violence returned. But what more can be done at this point, in your view?
Well, I think obviously a lot needs to be done in talking to foreign ministers in the region, beyond the region, including in Europe. I hear their concerns. I think people do worry about what would happen if things go badly. In terms of what can be done, look again, at the end of the day, Afghanistan, like every other society, has to be allowed its right to decide its future. But having said that, how do societies decide their future? There's got to be some process of legitimacy, right? I mean, you and I have elections. Okay, now I grant you, maybe not everybody has necessarily the same standards and practices and culture, whatever it is, but every society ultimately has some form of legitimacy and some form of selection of authority and transition of authority and replacement of authority. I mean, that's what civil society is all about. Now, the debate in a way today is how can we, if even assuming that you have parties who have different interests and shall I say different beliefs, but it cannot be that somebody says, well, I'm going to be the ruler because it's self-evident and it's me. There's got to be some process of arriving at that, and for the rest of the world, some process of assessing that and accepting that and underwriting it. So I do think that the world has a lot, I believe the world has a lot of influence which it can bring to play in a positive manner on what is happening in Afghanistan. Again, the current system may have its shortcomings. I mean, I think even they accept it. But the question is, how do you find an acceptable basis for who will govern Afghanistan? I mean, some kind of acceptable basis has to be formed. It should not just be handed over without addressing that question to anybody.
Right. And obviously it was an ugly election in Afghanistan, the last election, but it was an election nonetheless. And I think you're absolutely right. If there is to be some form of political transition, it has to reflect the will of the Afghan people in some way. And of course, every country has different traditions and different ways of conducting elections. But it is my sense from my time in Afghanistan that the vast majority, well over 90% of Afghans, don't want the Taliban to come back because they know what the hell that it was to live under Taliban rule from 96 to 2001. Minister, I wonder if you'd share your thoughts on the trajectory of Pakistan. There's been, of course, a lot of press coverage about talks now with the Pakistanis. This is, of course, been and it remains one of the most dangerous flashpoints, I think, in the world. Is really Pakistan's hostility toward India, the use of jihadist terrorist organizations against India as an arm of their foreign policy, and of course, both your country and Pakistan being nuclear armed countries. It is one of the most dangerous flashpoints in the world. What do you see as the future of India-Pakistan relations? And what's your prediction on these latest talks? And does this represent any kind of hope for a reduction in tension and hostility between your two countries?
Well, look, what I can tell you at this point of time is that we had a agreement some weeks ago between Director Generals of Military Operation that we would not uh, fire across at each other across the line of control, which has seen a lot of that. And it's seen a lot of that mainly because there's been infiltration from their side. So, the basis for not firing is very clear because the reason for firing is infiltration. So, if there is no infiltration, there's obviously no reason to fire. That's a good step, but I think there are obviously bigger issues. At the end of the day, the two neighbors have to find ways. It's not a question of do we live with each other. I think so. At the you won't live with each other if you're agnostic about how you live with each other. Okay. And you yourself pointed out that from 47, part of the problem has been the use of cross-border terrorism. So there also has to be perhaps a appreciation of what the cost has been to themselves, what it has done to their own society and how that has impacted them. I mean, they need to reflect on it because they are doing it to themselves. But I think it's important right now for if there is thinking along the lines that there needs to be a better relationship with India. On our side, there's been clarity of thinking. And the clarity of thinking is that we cannot accept terrorism. We cannot accept that it is in any way legitimate as diplomacy or as any other aspect of statecraft. So let us see, where this progresses. Obviously, everybody hopes for the best.
Right. And I hope that at some stage the Pakistani people demand more. I think what's striking about the situation is how the Pakistani army over time has created this problem, and how, of course, the Pakistani people have suffered at the hands of these terrorist organizations in this very dangerous ecosystem as well. Minister, I wanted to ask you about how you see political developments in your own country. I know you're not a partisan person. You've served with great distinction across many administrations, but there's concern these days in the midst of the pandemic about some of these Hindutva policies that could be undermining the secular nature of Indian democracy. And of course, this is what terrorists love, right? This is what jihadist terrorists love, is they want to divide people and portray themselves as patrons and protectors of a beleaguered community, or a community that believes that it is beleaguered. How do you see internal Indian politics evolving, really during this trauma of a pandemic and the recession associated with it? And are India's friends right to be concerned about some of these recent trends?
Look, first of all, let me clarify something. Yes, I served multiple administrations, as you would call it, over a number of years when I was a civil servant, when I was a professional diplomat. I am today elected member of parliament of a political party, the ruling political party, BJP. So do I have a political viewpoint and political interest? Of course I do. And I am hopefully articulate and expressive about the interests that I represent. Now, in terms of, look, what you said, I'd give you the straight political answer and perhaps a slightly more nuanced societal answer. The political answer is that in the past, there was a great reliance on, what's called vote bank politics, which is appealing to vote banks on the basis of their identity or their beliefs or whatever it is. And the fact that we have departed from it, has been obviously a difference. Now, India is a country of many faiths. We define, and faiths everywhere in the world are very closely tied to culture and identity. Now, in our society, we define secularism as equal respect for all faiths. Okay, secularism doesn't mean that you are in denial of your own faith or anybody else's faith, for that matter. I think what you are seeing in India, in many ways, is the I would say deepening of democracy, if you would call it, a much broader representation in politics and in leadership positions and in civil society of people who are much more confident about their culture, about their language, about their beliefs. It is, and I would be very open about it. I mean, these are people who perhaps are less, shall I say, less from the English-speaking world, less connected to other global centers. So there is a difference. And I think sometimes that difference is judged politically harshly, and it is often used to create a certain narrative. The larger societal explanation I would give you, which is at the end of the day, we have, you've been to India, okay? I mean, we are diverse in every conceivable sense of the term. I mean, ethnicity, language, I mean, you name a parameter and it's a broad spectrum sort of representation out there. But when it comes to any, I would say, policy or application of that, and I'll give you an example. I mean, we are going through a very stressful time right now because of the pandemic. Okay, we are actually giving free food last year for multiple months. Right now, again, because of second wave, we resumed to as much as 800 million people. Okay, we put money into the bank accounts of 400 million people. Okay, this is what this government did. Now, if you are, feeding more than 2.5 times the population of the United States, and you are funding more than the population of the United States, and you are doing this, I mean, pretty much anonymously and impersonally, in the sense beyond the name and the detail, the bank account of the person. You're not asking anything more. There's no criteria of discrimination. So I think when you come down to real governance judgments, you find that there is a difference between the political imagery that has been concocted and actually the governance record out there. So I think you should take it for what it is, which is really politics at play. You can agree with it, you can disagree with it, but I would certainly see that very much as part of a political effort to depict our current government in a certain way. And obviously, I have a very profound difference with that.
Of course, you may be aware we have our own divisions here in the United States as well politically, which I don't think ought to concern us in a democracy, right? But as long as the vast majority of our people have confidence, right, in the voice that they have in government and have confidence in the democratic processes and institutions. Mr. Jaishankar, I remember from our first conversation, we went to work on this Indo-Pacific strategy. You probably saw it declassified in the last few weeks of the Trump administration, and in it, we were very explicit about the importance of the relationship with India, the world's largest democracy, a country with whom we share democratic principles, and so in conclusion, what I wanted to ask you is, what are your thoughts on the trajectory of U.S.-India relations? What are the top on your priority list in terms of issues to work together on. We talked about these interconnected problems. We talked about how important it is for the solutions that we come up with to be acceptable to India, acceptable to developing economies across the world. What's the top of your agenda for the U.S.-India relationship going forward?
I have a big agenda, so that's going to take me a long period to share with you. But I'd put it to you this way. I think our relationship has come a long way. It's today one of the major relationships of the world. My own sense is that in Washington today, there is a real appreciation of the potential of this relationship, what it can do. And it's true of New Delhi as well. So the challenge for us, keeping in mind a lot of the issues that we've brought out in our conversation, impact of pandemic, rise of different powers, the fact that today we all recognize that, it's not a question of one or two or three countries who will decide how the world is. The world is truly much more multipolar. And if it is multipolar, then it's all the more important for countries to learn how to work with each other more effectively. And I see a big change in the American mindset in that regard. The United States, has not only an enormous ability to reinvent itself, it also has a great ability to assess its situation and re-strategize in a way. And I do think today that when it comes to the big issues of our day, maybe because we are pluralistic societies, because we are political democracies, because we are market economies, that we have fundamental convergences which are societal, convergences which are geopolitical. And I think the challenge before us is how to translate those convergences into actionable policies. And that's really what I was very happy to work with you during your tenure as National Security Advisor in doing. And I certainly look forward to doing that with the people in administration too.
Well, thank you, Minister. And Mr. Jaishankar, what a pleasure to see you again. On behalf of the Hoover Institution, thank you for helping us learn more about Battlegrounds important to building a future of peace and prosperity for generations to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure.
Battlegrounds is a production of the Hoover Institution, where we advance ideas that define a free society. For more information about our work, to hear more of our podcasts, or view our video content, please visit hoover.org.